users were required to type out commands to make their machines do much of anything. In that context, Musk's game did not shine as a marvel of computer science, but it certainly surpassed what most 12-year-olds were kicking out in the time. At the time, his coverage in the magazine netted Musk $500 and provided some early hints about his character. The Play Store spread on page 69 of the magazine shows that the young man Joshua Norman Haldeman is described as an athletic, self-reliant boy. In 1907, his family moved to the prairies of Saskatchewan, and his father died shortly thereafter when Joshua was just 7, leaving the boy to help run the house. He took to the wide open land and picked up bronco horseback riding, boxing, and wrestling. Haldeman would break in horses for local farmers, often hurting himself in the process, and he organized one of Canada's first rodeos. Family pictures show Joshua dressed in a decorative pair of chaps, demonstrating his rope spinning skills. As a teenager, Haldeman left home to get a degree from the Palmer School of Chiropractic in Iowa and then returned to Saskatchewan to become a farmer. When the Depression hit in the 1930s, Haldeman fell into a financial crisis. He could not afford to keep up with bank loans on his equipment and had 5,000 acres of land seized. From then on, Dad didn't believe in banks or holding on to money, said Scott Haldeman, who would go on to receive his chiropractic degree from the same school as his father and become one of the world's top spinal pain experts. After losing the farm around 1934, Haldeman lived something of a nomadic existence that his grandson would replicate in Canada decades later. Standing 6 feet 3 inches, he did odd jobs as a construction worker and rodeo performer before settling down as a chiropractor. By 1948, Haldeman had married a Canadian dance studio instructor, Winifred Josephine Fletcher, or Win, and built a booming chiropractic practice. That year, the family, which already included a son and a daughter, welcomed twin daughters, Kay and May, Musk's mother. The children lived in a 3-story, 20-room house that included a dance studio to let Win keep teaching students. Ever in search of something new to do, Haldeman had picked up flying and bought his own plane. The family gained some measure of notoriety as people heard about Haldeman and his wife packing their kids into the back of the single-engine craft and heading off on excursions all around North America. Haldeman would often show up at political and chiropractic meetings in the plane and later wrote a book with his wife called The Flying Haldemans, Pity the Poor Private Pilot. Haldeman seemed to have everything going for him when, in 1950, he decided to give it all away. The Dr. Cum politician had long railed against government interference in the lives of individuals and had come to see the Canadian bureaucracy as too meddlesome. A man who forbade swearing, smoking Coca-Cola, and refined flour at his house, Haldeman contended that the moral character of Canada had started to decline. Haldeman also possessed an enduring lust for adventure, and so over the course of a few months, the family sold their house and dance and chiropractic practices and decided to move to South Africa, a place Haldeman had never been. Scott Haldeman remembers helping his father disassemble the family's Balanga Cruiser 1948 airplane and put it into crates before shipping it to Africa. Once in South Africa, the family rebuilt the plane and used it to scour the country for a nice place to live, ultimately settling on Pretoria, where Haldeman set up a new chiropractic practice. The family's spirit for adventure seemed to know no bounds. In 1952, Joshua and Win made a 22,000-mile round-trip journey in their plane, flying up through Africa to Scotland and Norway. Win served as the navigator and, though not a licensed pilot, would sometimes take over the flying duties. The couple topped this effort in 1954, flying 30,000 miles to Australia and back. Newspapers reported on the couple's trip, and they're believed to be the only private pilots to get from Africa to Australia in a single-engine plane. When not up in the air, the Haldemans were out in the bush, going on great month-long expeditions to find the lost city of the Kalahari Desert, a supposed abandoned city in southern Africa. A family photo from one of these excursions shows the 5 children in the middle of the African bush. They have gathered around a large metal pot being warmed by the embers of a campfire. The children looked relaxed as they sat in folding chairs, legs crossed and reading books. Behind them is the ruby red Bell Lanka plane, a tent, and a car. The tranquility of the scene belies how dangerous these trips were. During one incident, the family's truck hit a tree stump and forced the bumper through the radiator. Stuck in the middle of nowhere with no means of communication, Joshua worked for 3 days to fix the truck while the family hunted for food. At other times, hyenas and leopards would circle the campfire at night, and one morning the family woke to find a lion 3 feet away from their main table. Joshua grabbed the first object he could find, a lamp, waved it, and told the lion to go away, and it did. The Haldeans had a laissez-faire approach to raising their children, which would extend over the generations to Musk. Their kids were never punished, as Joshua believed they would intuit their way to proper behavior. When mom and dad went off on their tremendous flights, the kids were left at home. Scott Haldeman can't remember his father setting foot at his school a single time, even though his son was captain of the rugby team and a prefect. To him, that was all just anticipated, said Scott Haldeman. We were left with the impression that we were capable of anything. You just have to make a decision and do it. In that sense, my father would be very proud of Elon. Haldeman died in 1974 at the age of 72. He had been doing practice landings in his plane and didn't see a wire attached to a pair of poles. The wire caught the plane's wheels and flipped the craft, and Haldeman broke his neck. Elon was a toddler at the time, but throughout his childhood, Elon heard many stories about his grandfather's exploits and sat through countless slide shows that documented his travels and trips through the bush. My grandfather told these tales of how they almost died several times along their journeys, Musk said. They were flying in a plane with literally no instruments, not even a radio, and they had road maps instead of aerial maps, and some of those weren't even correct. My grandfather had this desire for adventure, exploration, doing crazy things. Elon buys into the idea that his unusual tolerance for risk may well have been inherited directly from his grandfather. Many years after the last slideshow, Elon tried to find and purchase the red Blanca plane, but could not locate it. Mae Musk, Elon's mother, grew up idolizing her parents. In her youth, she was considered a nerd. She liked math and science and did well at the coursework. By the age of 15, however, people had taken notice of some of her other attributes. Mae was gorgeous, tall with ash blonde hair. Mae had the high cheekbones and angular features that would make her stand out anywhere. A friend of the family ran a modeling school, and Mae took some courses. On the weekends, she did runway shows, magazine shoots, occasionally showed up at a senator's or ambassador's home for an event, and ended up as the finalist for Miss South Africa. Mae has continued to model into her 60s, appearing on the covers of magazines like New York and Elle and in Beyonce's music videos. Mae and Elon's father, Errol Musk, grew up in the same neighborhood. They met from the first time when Mae, born in 1948, was about 11. Errol was a cool kid to Mae's nerd, but had a crush on her for years. He fell in love with me because of my legs and my teeth, said Mae. The two would date on and off throughout their time at university, and according to Mae, Errol spent about 7 years as a relentless suitor, seeking her hand in marriage and eventually breaking her will. He just never stopped proposing, she said. Their marriage was complicated from the start. Mae became pregnant during the couple's honeymoon and gave birth to Elon on June 28, 1971, 9 months and 2 days after her wedding day. While they may not have enjoyed marital bliss, the couple carved out a decent life for themselves in Pretoria. Errol worked as a mechanical and electrical engineer and handled large projects such as office buildings, retail complexes, residential subdivisions, and an Air Force base, while Mae set up a practice as a dietitian. A bit more than a year after Elon's birth came his brother Kimball, and soon thereafter came their sister Tosca. Elon exhibited all the traits of a curious, energetic tot. What about those names, huh? Let's see, Kimball, Elon, and Tosca. Sorry, just had to throw that in. He picked things up easily, and Mae, like many mothers do, pegged her son as brilliant and precocious. He seemed to understand things quicker than the other kids, she said. The perplexing thing was that Elon seemed to drift off into a trance at times. People spoke to him, but nothing got through when he had a certain distant look in his eyes. This happened so often that Elon's parents and doctors thought he might be deaf. Sometimes he just didn't hear you, said Mae. Doctors ran a series of tests on Elon and elected to remove his adenoid glands, which can improve hearing in children. Well, it didn't change, said Mae, and we will continue on next time.